Yeah, welcome to the Refinery, episode 4. We have MJ Peters here today, Vice President of Marketing at FireTrace. So MJ, tell us what you're up to.
So I lead the marketing team at FireTrace, and marketing at FireTrace basically means product management, strategic marketing, and marketing communications. So over the past about 18 months now, I have been building a team, kind of trying to change the culture around marketing here at FireTrace to focus on how it impacts strategic decision making, and also put processes in place to understand how the process of generating revenue happens all the way from brand awareness through the customer deciding to make a purchase, and then all the way through customer service and how the customer experiences your brand post-purchase.
So I've always, in a lot of companies I've worked at, I have seen that the leader of marketing would have product management, marketing strategy, or almost overall business strategy, if you think about it that way, and communications. But as I've gotten more into the world, I see that most companies, especially in SaaS, have boxed marketing into comms or lead gen or whatever you want to call it. So what would you say about the differences between those two models?
So I think if you're gonna box marketing into just comms, you're gonna have a less effective structure for two reasons. First, the level of talent you're gonna attract if the position is just about comms is probably not gonna be necessarily as high. I don't know if that's true across the board, but in my experience. And second, because doing comms well requires you to understand the entire business, the customers, and the processes and how that works. If you're gonna box comms in, they're probably not gonna have the resources to be able to go out and understand that. They're probably not gonna have the access to customers that somebody who had a more broad scope of responsibilities might have.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that in most companies that have that structure, the primary way that their marketers get market intelligence or customer insights is through the sales team. And when you get the information through the sales team, not on your own, those two people are looking at things in very different ways. And the way that you intake what the customer's saying to you based on how you're trying to see it is going to bias how you draw conclusions from it, right? And so salespeople are looking at things in short term, and they're always in a sales situation. So if they lose a deal because of something that the customer told them, that's probably not the reason they lost the deal, but then they're going to feed that into marketing. It's going to be misinformation. It's going to drive product or comms in the wrong direction. And so I've always found that in order for a marketer to do their job well, they need to be the one that's going and understanding the customers on their own, going out into the market, doing job shadowing, doing interviews. In non-sales situations, I think is the most important part. If you can make people feel comfortable in telling you the truth, inside of those, then you get the real information. The next step is to digest it and actually interpret what it means. So what they're telling you if you take it directly, it might not be exactly what you're looking for. And so, or it might not be exactly what they mean. And so off of that rant, what do you have to add, or what do you have to, what's your experience been with that?
One thing that I think a really interesting angle to look at this from is about your business model, because the role of sales is to execute whatever your core business model is and execute it really, really well and deliver those sales for you. And so when they hear problems or encounter an issue that prevents them from closing a deal, they always think, or not always, but a lot of the times you're driven to think by the way your job is set up that it's something that you need to improve incrementally about the existing business model. But if you're not necessarily focused on the existing business model every day, if you are in a strategic marketing role that allows you to think about how your business model could change, then you can diagnose those problems in a lot of different ways, and you might come up with an answer that maybe requires a little bit more work, requires a little more structural change, but ultimately delivers a lot bigger impact.
And I think the key takeaway I got from that is that sales executes the business model and the business strategy. But I think in a lot of companies today, sales is starting to set the business strategy and the go-to-market strategy and how it's executed. And I'm not sure what I think about that. I mean, I've encountered in a lot of cases where because the sales team is defining the customer segments that you're going after, you end up going after everybody. The messaging becomes too broad. You don't have a focused ICP, and therefore you don't have a focused kind of like entry point into the market. And I think it can really slow you down. So, yeah, I've run into that a few times. I feel like the way that I've always thought about it, especially if you're a small company and you're trying to make your way in, the obvious thought from somebody else would be, I want to go after every market, and I want to go after all of them because it's the most total addressable. It gives me the biggest size. I can tell my investors about it. It'll be great. But what I've always found is there is a small sub-segment of the customers that you're going after that are really getting the value from the product. And so if you're able to identify that and then focus there, and then have your marketing team identifies that as the business is going on or before you go to market, and you're able to iterate on your messaging, your positioning, your focus there. Once you get in to that space, it then gives you the flexibility to expand later, as opposed to doing it the other way around. Right?
The issues that might be driving that behavior of, hey, I'm going to focus on everything all the time rather than narrow it down to the specific subset of customers that really need my product and will close quickly and consistently, is just that, first of all, salespeople need to put numbers on the board, and they shouldn't be spending their time, nor could they possibly spend their time just sitting around and thinking about who these customers are, which is why if you're going to expect your salespeople to do the strategic marketing function alongside doing sales, you have to acknowledge that you're asking somebody to do two jobs. And they're probably not particularly adept at one of those jobs, likely strategic marketing. You hired them for a sales role. But also they just don't have time. It's too much pressure. It's too much to ask of somebody. And it seems like people just don't want to invest because they don't believe that strategic marketing will work. And so they're kind of do it without making a big investment by just asking their sales team to take it on the side. And without committing to it, it's just not going to work.
I've always, the best companies that I've worked for is when whatever you want to call them, CMO, VP marketing, was a strategist first and communications lead gen second. And they can fill that role with a director or VP level that can really go and get that stuff done. But your comms are not, you're limiting your upside so much if you don't have a cohesive marketing, a marketing strategy behind the comms.
Yep. Well, and it's not just that your marketing strategy has to be relevant to your comms. It also has to be directly relevant to your sales process, because if I'm a customer and my first interaction with your brand is I look at your website. On your website, your messaging and the way you present your brand makes me feel like, oh my God, this is a problem I need to solve right now. But then it gets handed off to an SDR who passes you on to an AE, and like at the end of the day, your sales cycle takes 10, 15 weeks. It just feels authentic, right? Because first with your brand, you're trying to make me feel like I need to solve this problem today, but you won't help me solve it for 10 weeks.
Yeah, you have to, a big gap that I see in a lot of companies is they say things in their marketing messaging, but they never deliver on them.
You have to be honest with messaging, like a lot of marketing can be too many shiny messages, and like it's trying to put the best foot forward, understandably. But successful positioning is understanding actually what you are the best in the world at and putting that foot forward, which comes back to this idea you can't be everything to everyone because you'll just fail to deliver.
So talk to me about, so I was talking to someone yesterday, and this is happening it happened in B2C a decade ago and continues to happen. It's happening in B2B now, which is that there's becoming, because it's so much easier to go direct to consumer, that their existing channels are starting to get either disrupted or just they're trying to do both and creating channel conflict, especially in hardware products, right? So if you look at all of the companies that are selling through Whole Foods and Amazon and their own website and all the other third-party type of things, that's happening in a lot of companies right now. And so if you're a B2B company and you have channels, e-com, direct sales, channel partners, and maybe different layers of channel partners, what do you do right now? Because what that scenario is not going to work.
Yeah, I think right now, I mean, especially with the explosion of digital marketing, there's so many ways for the end user to experience your brand. So whereas 15 years ago, maybe the only way that an end user could experience your brand is if they see you at a trade show, or if the local rep at the distributor comes and knocks on your door and talks to you, or is there to deliver some other product and happens to talk to you about this second product line that they have on their line card. Now, you could see a Facebook ad, you could read something in an online publication, you could see something posted on LinkedIn, and be compelled to research a brand and interact with them. And none of that requires a local presence of somebody to come knock on your door, or even a physical presence at something like a trade show. And I think there's massive implications for a company's business model, but that's a really complex problem to tackle, right? Like, how is my business model changing now that people can experience my brand remotely?
Absolutely. And so in my view, the only way that a distributor, and I wouldn't even call them a distributor, if that channel can add value, is if they are somehow adding value. They're taking your product, putting it on top of another product that they sell, which is value-added reseller, or maybe it could be an OEM channel, or somehow packaging it up, or doing I can't really figure out exactly what, but the idea that somebody's going to be your local, warehouse and take orders and take 25 or 30 points from your sale just doesn't make any sense, because they're not selling the way that they used to 15 years ago. I think companies are starting to recognize that. You see a lot of companies starting to break away from national distributors and going direct. The problem is that when you make that change, you're vulnerable. One, you risk lowering your revenue significantly because you don't have the coverage, or you have to invest significantly in building your own channel, and maybe if you're publicly traded or venture funded, you can't afford to do that, and so you get stuck. And so it's very strange, because in business, because of the short-term focus on results and not being able to take a step back, that companies can't take one step backwards to go two step forwards. Often they're handcuffed, and so how can a company actually make a change like that? What do they do?
Yeah, I actually think it's interesting because you mentioned the change being really hard to do. It's risky. It might require a ton of capital. I think actually in a lot of cases, companies simply aren't making that change because they don't realize they can, where their thinking is, and it might be because there's nobody on their staff who has the time and the energy and the bandwidth to think about like big strategic decisions like that, because everybody's really focused on executing today's business model. But
Mm-hmm.
I actually think one thing that could be really interesting to start seeing is rather than the conversation of being about how do we cut the distributor out, maybe the conversation needs to be about how can a manufacturer and a distributor work together so that both parties benefit from this shifting landscape, right? Because if I'm a distributor and I, either add value through offering a whole range of products that one individual manufacturer doesn't make, or I'm adding value by offering a service like installation, maintenance, that's especially products, maybe I double down as the distributor on being really, really good at that installation and service aspect, and that adds a ton to the manufacturer. And all of a sudden, they have to focus less on it. They can make better products, and together we have this relationship where we grow despite kind of the changing landscape by taking advantage of those trends.
Mm-hmm. Because if you are if you're a distributor and you sit in the middle and you don't add value, you are going to get cut out eventually. You're sitting, just like insurance agents and real estate people, like the internet is connecting the manufacturer to the customer. You're in the middle right now, and over time you're going to get wiped out. Is the way that I see it. So how do you, if you're going to be in that position, you have two options as a distributor. You either build services that add value in the middle that the manufacturer either can't or doesn't strategically want to take on, or you start competing with the manufacturers that you currently distribute for, either in private label situations or other things like that. Those are the only two options. And then eventually you as a distributor, you're creating your own brand and competing with your current partners.
Well, and I hope that we see distributors and the manufacturers that we are distributors for starting to have these open conversations more, because the decision that's going to benefit both is never going to get made if people aren't sharing these ideas and talking about how to move our businesses forward now that people can experience these brands in all these different ways, and there are these opportunities to change, but they also create possibility competition, and competition freaks people out. As if a partnership transforms into a competitor relationship, it really sours things really fast, but it doesn't happen. People start anticipating these changes and talking to each other about it.
So let's take a little bit of a turn and get a little bit deeper into like the details of strategic marketing. So like what are people, I think when we put the thing up, like product management, strategic marketing, comms, like comms is seems pretty easy to people. Product management I think people can get what it means from a marketing perspective. But talk about the strategy. Like if you go into a company, and I'll share what I do too, like as a marketing leader, what's the 90-day plan?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when I first came to FireTrace, I wouldn't say that strategic marketing was its own kind of defined function. It was, a little bit of everybody doing different roles, kind of tagging in when it made sense to. And what we wanted to do was make a shift in our organizational structure and kind of in the culture to say that actually strategic marketing is something we want to do now. So the first thing that I did was just, think about what is strategic marketing. The first thing that comes to mind is talking to your customers and understanding their work. And that doesn't just mean salespeople talking to customers. It means the marketing team talking to customers. It means the engineering team talking to customers. If you have a product team, it means the product team talking to customers. And if you come into a business that isn't used to doing that, you can't just expect that people will know what you mean when you say, go talk to customers. So one of the first things we did was we just pulled everybody off site for, 2 full days. And we talked about, what do I mean when I say talking to customers? How do you have an effective customer conversation? And we actually brought customers in And we had an expert from outside interview our customers in front of everybody, and people could try interviewing customers. And obviously you have to have, nice customers that are willing to help you out with that kind of thing, that are approachable in order to do something like that. But it was hugely transformative to a couple of key people in terms of the way that they were thinking. And it was an incredible investment, I think, for our business as we implemented that culture change.
Okay, so step one, customers. What happens after that?
I think you need to understand what your strategy is in terms of where strategic marketing fits in. So, I mean, your strategy can be as simple as we're gonna go learn about these 3 markets because we, sell into them, but we don't have an intimate knowledge of them. But you need to kind of define a scope, right? Like, we're gonna go talk to customers, but we want to do it with this kind of end goal. So set the boundaries, because if you leave it too open-ended, you're not going to get the depth of information and the real insights that you need. So train the team, empower them, set the scope, and then you kind of got to decide what the milestones are going to be. When do you want to review this? When do you want to reach it? Because it is kind of an ambiguous process, strategic marketing, and you have to have people who are motivated to continue pushing it forward and eventually get to the point where you can revisit that strategy with those insights.
Yeah, so I think, like, depending on where you're coming into the company, the first step is, like, to me, it's like, what is the baseline? Like, what are we doing right now, right? Like, you're new, you might have it in a nice document, it might literally be in a bunch of people's heads, it might be in the head of the CMO that was fired or left, and now no one knows what we're doing, right? They might think, but there's no North Star, really. So what are we doing today? And then my next step is to audit that with customers. So go out and I talk to both current customers and prospects, always in non-sales situations, and start asking them questions. At the beginning, it's very open-ended, very broad. What are your goals? What are you working on? How does our product fit in? And you start to close in. And once you do 6 or 8 of them, you start to hear the same things, right? Because, like, you're new to a market, you don't understand the lingo, you start to hear people saying the same things, you find what those things are, you start to go deeper into whatever those things are that are important into future interviews, and then at some point you start to hit diminishing returns. You've gotten the insights that you need for that point, and then you go back and you put together your whether it's a strategy or hypothesis or however you want to do it. So maybe we're changing our ICP, or we're focusing our ICP in more detail. We're going to shift our positioning slightly, and we're going to change these 3 parts of the message. That's the hypothesis. And then I'm going to go back out to prospects, and I'm going to start testing that messaging. It's something that you have to do in person because the nonverbal reactions are the most valuable. And so you basically, in a lot of cases, not just when I'm doing that, but I'm just saying stuff and mainly just seeing how people react to what I say. Was it a positive reaction? Was it a negative reaction? I can ask why, and you start to understand if there are objections that you didn't understand. If the message is resonating or not, maybe you need to adjust it. Maybe your ICP was wrong. And so that iterative process eventually gets you to, okay, I know who my customers are. I know that this messaging resonates with them. I know that they're getting X, Y, and Z value from the product. Now let's roll it out to the sales team. And then you train the sales team, then you build your marketing engine, then you start doing lead gen. That's the order of activities, is the way that I see it. But everyone just goes, okay, I'm new. I might as well just guess that all of the assumptions that the company's made up to this point are correct, and I'll just go and do some promotion. Like, we'll use the messaging and we'll talk to whoever these, and they don't even take the time to really understand whether or not any of those assumptions are right. And I'll give you a hint, they're never right. I've not been, some of them are right, but it's never perfect. I haven't seen it be, there's always some details to find, mainly because one, you're looking at it in an objective way. And the second thing is that people aren't doing this on an ongoing basis. So they put their strategy together in 2016, and they've been working toward that strategy and probably haven't audited it on an ongoing basis. So there's always something new in the market to find.
I think you described two really distinct phases there. One is I'm just going to go out and learn as much as I can, and that involves a lot of open-ended questions, and I'm just going to not assume that anything is correct, right? Nothing is correct until a customer tells me that it's correct. And then two is I have a hypothesis and I'm testing it with people, and a lot of people just skip phase one and they use internal knowledge to form the hypothesis, and then go out. Sometimes they'll go out and do phase two, but you get a lot of false positives if your hypothesis is based on internal knowledge without doing that open-ended question and answer conversation with your customer up front.
You have happy ears. Sometimes the people that you're talking to, if you don't know how to ask the questions the right way, they just give you what you want, right? And so I want to, instead of like tell them what I want them to say back to me, I like ask the questions to see if what I'm thinking in my head is actually what they would come back to me with. It's a lot of people don't use that nuance.
Well, and the customer, doesn't spend their time thinking about how you can grow your business, nor should they, because they have to run their business, right? So, by understanding their world really, almost as well as they do, you can then go back and invest that time in how do I use this understanding to add value to them and thereby grow my business? Because I promise you, they're not going to think about it for you and then just tell you the answer. It would be way too easy if that was the case.
And I will say that it's a lot easier if you're selling a sales technology product to salespeople and you're a salesperson, or you're selling a marketing planning SaaS product and you're selling it to marketers, because you are inherently a peer if you've been in that marketing role before. But when you start getting into industries like healthcare or industrial or other places like that, the people that are doing the marketing and selling have no idea what it's like to be on the actual customer side, and that's when it becomes even more important.
Yep. Well,
Right.
and that's why you have to not just, send out a survey on SurveyMonkey, and sit behind your computer and type stuff to people. You have to go out and get in the field, have you ever install your own system before? Because you might find out what it's like to be somebody using your product when you otherwise just wouldn't even know.
So now I'm gonna throw a curveball, which is what we've been coining the lightning round. Oh, you might have seen it since you watched a couple of them, where I just fire off questions and then you fire off whether it's one word or one sentence, or you want to go deeper. Then you just give us your answers and we'll go through it as long as I can think of questions. Okay, so, oh, you didn't see this one? Okay, so, if you could only pick one, strategy or comms?
Strategy.
Should, in a lot of companies, marketing is now reporting to a CRO who's a salesperson. Is that good or not?
I think it depends on, what role marketing plays in your organization. But if I had to say yes or no, I would say marketing needs to be its own function.
What is the number one thing that companies should stop spending money on in 2020?
I don't have an answer of that off the top of my head, but we can come back to it.
Okay, so mine is trade shows or other sponsors of trade conferences. The banners at the airport when you get off the plane for the trade show, the print ads in their magazine, the banner ads on their websites, all of that stuff you can do yourself. I think it's a complete waste of money to use that, to think that that conference is the connection point to your customers. The biggest challenge for marketers today?
I think there's just a lot of noise, like you gotta be doing AdWords and you gotta be doing social media and you gotta be doing strategy and you gotta be doing growth hacking, whatever that means. And so to cut through the noise and identify the 1 or 2 or 3 things that would be really impactful for your business is challenging because there's so many things out there. And at the end of the day, you're only going to execute 1 or 2 or 3 things really well. You're not going to execute 20 things really well at the same time because resources are limited. It's a fact.
What percentage of your marketing budget should you spend on content in 2020?
I think it depends on what industry you're in. I think manufacturers, which is my industry, I think we as a collective group probably spend less than 5% of our budgets on content. And I think you can make a really good argument that manufacturers should be spending anywhere from 40 to 60 or 70% of their budget on content.
I was going to say 50. If you could only use one social platform next year, what would it be?
Right now, I would have to say Facebook, because I think that our kind of end customers that influence the buying process, they are there. I think for other businesses, they might be on LinkedIn. I have never seen somebody say that the answer is Twitter, but if the answer is Twitter, tell me about it in the comments on this video.
Yeah, I've never heard anyone say Twitter either. Okay, and what is the most powerful form of marketing?
I think it's honestly got to be word of mouth referral because, and that's influenced by all your other channels, of course, but I trust somebody, if they're in my network and I see that they do good work when they tell me, hey, you need this product, because they probably understand me in my situation better than any salesperson or marketer at a vendor, and they have my best interest in mind, and I know that.
Fire. Okay, so now if you have one question for the people that are watching this and you want to collect some information, what question would you ask?
So we've been thinking a lot about brand and purpose and how you build a brand and communicate authentically. So I would ask people out there what their advice is in terms of how do you do that really well, and what are the pitfalls?
Cool. Thanks for joining. That was fun.
Yeah, that was.